Heyo, how is everyone going? Welcome. Today we are going to be making a world map, but a little bit different from what we usually do, in that we might make a world map that looks like this, or maybe we make a world map that looks like this. But today we're only going to be using the parchment stamp, something I've legitimately never done before. I'm super excited to do. But if we go to the parchment stamps, they all look like this, and we can see that there aren't a ton of them compared to the fantasy stamps, where there's way more options and we can go into quite a bit more depth. So we're going to untick that, get rid of it, because it's parchment only. On top of making a world map, I would also crank open a good old-fashioned Google Doc for note-taking, because we'd also be creating a little bit of lore and history for our world. We ended up creating a really cool high-level campaign idea to accompany this map, but that gets its own video. This video will focus on the world map creation and how we made lore from it, or used lore to affect the map making. Before we get to the lore though, we'd start just putting down some land to form the basis of our world. I've never made anywhere like this that has this sort of connecting little things off with these like tendril land masses, like little land bridges with lakes in the middle. So I also want to try to like diversify my style and do different things. So maybe that's what we're going to lean on, is having, instead of smaller islands, which is very classic, you know, a big landmass and small islands, we're just going to have them all connected. When it came to texturing the map, we'd stumble upon the first real difference between the parchment map making and our regular map making. Usually I would actually place these kind of first, but I think in this case it makes a little bit of sense to do it where we put the stamps down first and then we fill the colors out later, because it's like this purple, this red. I'm not really sure how we would use those. So maybe we try to create areas and then figure out, you know, the coloring that would match those areas. It's maybe going to be a better way. As we went to place our first stamps, we also decided to have the different segments more purposefully pocketed, each home to a unique terrain type. On a lore front, we'd narrativized pretty closely off these terrains where each of the areas would be home to its own kingdom. This simple kingdom styling would be further justified because we'd have the creator of this world be a child god who treats this world as their own personal play pit for them to mess around in. An idea which would heavily affect many of the aspects of the map and lore. When it came to the actual geography, I would continue building off the blueprint I quickly created earlier, adding more rivers and lakes to the Lake Kingdom, for example. And while I was mostly doing many of my classic moves, I wanted to incorporate some new map making techniques that I never do. I am trying to change up some of my techniques, and I'm liking the way that this is a bit more just sporadic trees. Onto the process of naming our kingdoms, and we'd lean heavily on the idea of everything being created by a child, calling our kingdoms Big Rock Opia, Wateria Berg, Lots of Treesdom, and Funky Forest Land. We went along placing some trees and desert, which I would fill with messes, because I always try very specifically to avoid any large empty sections, even in deserts or plains. Filling them with something like rocks always looks better in my opinion than having them actually empty. As far as lore for the world, we would keep our kingdoms incredibly basic. We can absolutely lean on these terrain types and maybe the types of cultures which would be there. And because a kid god is the one creating the politics, I think it can be very simple and very much like exactly what you think it would be. It doesn't have to be like too complex or anything. Something I was noticing about the map that is true for regular maps but was doubly true here is that if you only have one type of stamp in an area, it looks incredibly samey and boring. And as such, I wanted to try and mix in the limited stamps we had whenever possible. Awesome. Let's add some rocks into this area, and I think this can have maybe just some light hills mixed into this area. Nothing too crazy. This desire for a diversity of objects on the map would inspire a goal. My goal is to use every single stamp that Parchment has. There's not a ton, so I want to use all of these terrain stamps, and then I think I'm going to use all of these as well. And then as far as like symbols or decorations, we'll definitely add them in, but not necessarily all the heraldry, but every single one of these terrain stamps I'm going to use. So this is when we're going to do cliffs. Incorporating cliffs onto the map would lead to by far my favorite thing I did on this map, and maybe one of my favorite things I've ever done on a world map: creating a canyon system. What at first started as a simple canyon would quickly become a large weaving channel that cuts its way through the entire forest kingdom. This expansion would just keep happening. I'd add a second canyon section. Then, purely because I was enjoying making them, I'd fill the nation with them. I am really happy with how this canyon has turned out. This little canyon section. And I think I'm probably just gonna maybe put a couple more of those on the map because they're just, they're a lot of fun to make. So yeah, let's make a couple more. And that's cool. If you're enjoying something in map making, dive in, do a bunch of it. Let yourself have fun with the process and let that enjoyment influence the map. Bouncing through the map, we'd go adding a plethora of trees, rocks, craters, whatever sort of nature stamps were available to make the parchment look that extra bit alive, which worked pretty well. So now it was time for buildings. And maybe I should have thought about this before. I didn't at all, but like, what size are we going to go for these towns? I'm not sure. It's a good question. And I think when we put these down, we really want to think about like where places, like where cities and settlements might naturally occur. So say like this canal path here, that's probably a pretty natural place for it to go. And we can put one here as well. And I guess like the question is, are we going to do the thing where we have these sort of, you know, bigger stamps and then maybe like a couple smaller ones in the mix here? Or are we going to just do straight bigger? And I think maybe we'll try a little bit of this sort of this style here, like that. This style and subsequent stamp size would more resemble our classic world maps. However, in hindsight, this was a huge mistake. The major problem here is that the parchment stamps aren't super visually distinctive from each other because they have no color. So trees, hills, and buildings all look similar-ish if they are very small. So when you zoom out and look at the map, it's basically impossible to actually see the buildings. I'd realized this later on and decided to just leave it, but the map would be much better if I went through, deleted all the towns and cities and placed them again, but much bigger. Off this, I think a map with 40 to 50 towns like we'd end up with isn't great for this parchment style, because to proportion correctly, you need to make the towns small. So next time I make a parchment map, I will definitely have larger building stamps, with them being either representative, taking up more space on the map than they actually take up in the world, or making the world smaller so their large size is proportional. With the buildings being dropped onto the map, we'd also figure out the racial composition of our nations. So yeah, I think we can definitely have these 4 nations, also have just one single monolith race that represents them. Big Rockopia, that's the dwarves. Waterreaburg, that's the elves. Lots of Treesdom, that's the humans. And Funky Forest Land is the orcs. And when we pick out our stamps to represent them, you know, we have, this is elves, that is dwarfs, that's humans, and that is orc. And they only have a couple of these, and we can just lean on that as well. And I think that matches with what's being provided by Incarnate. And after a few more extra stamps being placed, we would finish with the base map. Now it was time for the colorization process. Awesome, so we basically are done with our map, and I think as is, this is a really cool map, but I do want to mess around with the colorization. So we've cloned it, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through and colorize it, see what that looks like, see how that works, and then we can compare it to what it currently is, which is having no colorization on it, and we'll see what looks better, because I get the feeling that just as is, like this is actually going to be the best version of it. But I'm curious to see what it does look like with color. I hadn't placed any color until now because it seemed much more finicky than usual, so leaving until after everything was set in stone seemed like the way to do it. This was way more correct than I thought it would be. To make the color and the brushes look good, you need to be way more precise than on regular maps, because usually the stamps themselves provide a ton of color, while here the brushes are the only way to provide color, and you can see me start to figure this out. I like the idea of the canyon having its own color, and this does feel like it is going to be at its best if I'm very specific with it. So if I go through and be very small with it, which, you know, it is good to know that like maybe a parchment map is a bit more of like a specific painting, rather than when you usually do brushstrokes on fantasy maps where you can be very broad with it, because the colorizing is just a bit more usually general. Yeah, this feels, it's like, oh, okay, I'm like painting in these, you know, say the cliff faces, for example, it's like they're not filled in and painting gives them the background color. Okay. Yeah, that's actually looking pretty good, to be honest. The issue with this is it was taking up a lot of time to do even a bad job of it, let alone a good job. So I would try painting the various areas one single color each. Yeah, like you agree on the fact that it's like just the one single color is kind of making it look better? Like there's these big colors? I think it kind of works. This ended up looking okay, and a map with a few distinctive colors for each nations would probably look really solid, but I think this fine painting of the canyons was very engaging and something to build off. However, as I said, it was time consuming. I made the entire map in around 2 hours. Then just this small amount of colorization took me around 20 minutes. And to be honest, I just wasn't really interested in spending the time it would take to do the whole map correctly with that level of detail. So I'd spend about 10 minutes trying to bring some general representative paint color to the map just to see what it looked like, which would lead to the end of our map making. As far as coloration goes, I think it turned out okay. If we compare it to this map, it definitely pops a lot more. I think this is nicer in its purity in a lot of ways, but I think both sort of have merits. If we were to do this again, and I think I definitely identified this as we went, this would look a lot better, the colorization, if we did what we did down here, where it's like, for the canyon, we sort of went along the line and we were very specific. And if we did that with the trees, and we very much did that with the mountains or whatever, where you can see I've just sort of broadly done these strokes rather than really tried to be specific. If we were like genuinely using the brush strokes to paint the parchment, I think it would look good, if not really, really good. And I haven't done that. And the reason is just because it's going to take hours and hours and hours. And this is more of an experiment. You know, we've done this entire map in less than 3 hours. It looks solid. I'm really happy with it. Never used the parchment texture before, and I don't necessarily want to spend double the amount of time just to color it all in. So that's one thing. The big issue that this map has, the big problem, is that the towns are really, really not visible on the map at all, right? You can barely tell where they are. If you look at them, they're super unclear, right? Even these big ones here do not pop off the map. And if I was to redo this, I would definitely make the buildings a lot bigger. I would probably do stuff like that. I could go through and do all of that stuff, but I sort of just settled on a smaller design, and that's okay. That's just sort of what I settled on. But definitely, if I was doing this again, I would make sure all the parchment buildings are way bigger and way more noticeable. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it as a map. Yeah, I think they're pretty good. And it was a fun thing to experiment with. So, as I usually say, 2 thumbs up. This brings my first parchment map making to a close, a fun process which had some different challenges to normal maps, which I love. I'm keen to take the lessons I learned here and try again, because I think in the future I can do a much better job. And that's the video. If you're keen to use these maps or some of the much better maps for your own campaigns, then jump on the Patreon where there is a massive collection. Thanks so much to everyone who has already done that. It is very cool of you. Subscribe to the channel for more and better map creation. Watch some other videos because they're also good. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye!